Do you really want to detain me? Angela Thompson's voice cut through the air of the busy pharmacy, calm yet unmistakably firm, drawing every eye toward her. The automatic doors swished closed behind her as the scent of antiseptic and fresh coffee mingled, the fluorescent lights casting a pale glow over the gleaming shelves stacked with vitamins and over-the-counter medications. Customers froze mid-step, shopping carts squeaking gently on the polished linoleum, some pausing with raised brows, others clutching their phones a little tighter as the tension coiled around the aisles like static electricity. Angela's posture was upright, every inch of her presence radiating a quiet authority that contrasted sharply with the uniformed officer standing rigidly in front of the counter. Officer Brad Collins, badge gleaming under the harsh lights, towered over her, arms crossed, face taut with the precision of someone used to unquestioned control. The air seemed to hold its breath as she lifted her prescription bag slightly, fingers brushing the top in a gesture of ordinary intent, yet every movement measured, deliberate, unshakable. Behind the counter, the cashier froze, pen poised mid-signature, eyes darting between Angela and the officer, sensing the sudden gravity of the encounter. Shelves of neatly arranged boxes blurred in the background as the camera of perception zoomed in on Angela's face, her eyes steady, unflinching, yet warm, reflecting the calm certainty of a woman who had navigated the halls of justice far longer than the fluorescent-lit pharmacy she now stood in. The soft hum of the refrigeration units behind her mingled with the distant squeak of cart wheels, creating a rhythm that underscored the weight of the moment. A subtle ripple passed through the small crowd gathered in the aisles, murmurs barely audible, the shuffle of shoes echoing faintly as each person absorbed the unfolding drama. Angela's lips curved into a faint, controlled smile, not of triumph but of resolve, as if the words she was about to speak had been rehearsed in the theater of her mind 1,000 times, each iteration sharpening their clarity. Officer Collins's gaze narrowed, brows furrowing, his own confidence momentarily challenged by the unmistakable aura of authority emanating from this ordinary-looking woman in jeans and a soft blazer. He shifted slightly, the weight of his standard-issue belt pressing against his hip, the metallic jingle of keys punctuating the stillness. Angela took a measured step forward, the soles of her shoes silent against the linoleum, her movement fluid and controlled, commanding the invisible space around her. Then, with a voice that carried effortlessly across the frozen air of the pharmacy, she stated plainly, "I'm a federal judge." The words fell like a gavel striking in an empty courtroom, resonating with a power that transcended the fluorescent lights, the buzzing registers, and the whispered questions of onlookers. Eyes widened, breath caught, the tense pause stretching into a tangible force field that held everyone in place, the rhythm of their hearts sinking to the shock of revelation. Officer Collins's hand twitched toward his notebook, then paused, uncertainty flickering in his eyes as the certainty of Angela's identity collided with the habitual assumptions of authority he had long taken for granted. Customers instinctively stepped back, some gripping their carts, others pressing against the cool metal of the shelving units, each one an unintentional witness to a shift in the natural order, a subtle recalibration of power unfolding in the middle of aisle 4. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, shadows stretching along the floor tiles, creating geometric patterns that seemed to echo the tension, the balance between perceived authority and true influence. Angela's steady gaze swept the room, taking in the frozen faces, the half-raised cameras, the rigid posture of the officer, all of it absorbing her composed presence. And then, as if the moment itself held its breath, she allowed the faintest exhale, a delicate release of tension that rippled outward, grounding the scene in the certainty of truth and the promise of what would come next. Angela Thompson adjusted the strap of her tote bag, her fingers brushing over the worn leather as she took a deliberate step toward the exit of the pharmacy. The soft clatter of the automatic doors creating a counterpoint to the hushed murmurs of the gathered customers. The sunlight spilled across the floor in elongated streaks, catching dust particles in the air that shimmered like tiny motes of gold, dancing gently around her poised figure. Officer Brad Collins remained momentarily frozen, a subtle tension rippling through his shoulders as he processed the reality of her declaration, his hand hovering over the counter as if to reach for reassurance, yet unsure what form it should take. The hum of the air conditioning units mixed with the faint rustle of receipt paper, layering the scene with an undercurrent of ordinary activity that contrasted sharply with the extraordinary presence of authority Angela carried effortlessly. Her eyes scanned the room calmly, taking in the faces of the onlookers, some wide-eyed and leaning slightly forward, others attempting to shrink into the background, phones clutched with tentative curiosity, all absorbing the quiet shift in dynamics with an almost imperceptible energy that vibrated through the air. The pharmacist behind the counter, mid-sentence moments ago, froze in place, hands hovering over the prescription scanner, pencil poised for signature, as if the very act of completing a transaction had been suspended by the gravity of Angela's presence. She stepped over the faint line of sunlight cast by the door, her shoes whispering against the polished tile, creating a rhythmic counterpoint to the slowed heartbeats of those around her. Outside, the street beyond the glass doors buzzed with the gentle cadence of midday traffic, tires rolling over asphalt, distant conversations blending into a soft murmur. Yet inside the pharmacy, time seemed to bend, each second drawn out, stretching the tension like elastic across the room. Angela's breathing remained even, a calm contrast to the subtle tightening of Officer Collins's jaw and the faint furrow of his brow, the faint sheen of perspiration on his temple catching the overhead light as he measured the scene before him, weighing authority against truth. A brief pause allowed the soundscape of clicking keyboards, the shuffle of customers adjusting their carts, and the occasional soft thump of shoes against tile to become almost musical, underscoring the unfolding narrative with a rhythmic undercurrent. Angela allowed her gaze to wander slightly, acknowledging the young mother with a child at the end of the aisle, a man holding a shopping basket, and the cashier leaning slightly to glimpse the unfolding exchange, her presence steady, her composure absolute, an unspoken assertion of competence and recognition that filled the space with quiet, undeniable power. The officer's lips parted slightly, a silent concession forming as his eyes flickered toward the badge clipped to Angela's bag, the metallic reflection catching the light and affirming the reality that had begun to ripple through the room. The ambient noises of a busy pharmacy, the soft murmur of conversation, the gentle beeping of scanners, the faint swish of automatic doors, continued, but each carried a new weight, tinted by awareness and the subtle acknowledgement of an authority that transcended uniforms, height, and assumptions. Angela moved fluidly toward the exit, her shoulders squared, her steps measured, each one a quiet assertion of control, while the soft glint of sunlight played across her hair and the polished tile beneath, signaling the conclusion of a confrontation and the beginning of a quiet, reflective aftermath, leaving those present with an unspoken invitation to witness the full story beyond the confines of the pharmacy doors. Angela Thompson stepped out onto the sunlit sidewalk, the warm afternoon light spilling across the brick facade of the pharmacy and catching the edges of her blazer in soft glimmers. The city hummed around her, tires rolling over asphalt, distant voices mingling with the faint chirp of a street musician tuning a guitar in the next block. Yet all these sounds seemed muted beneath the clarity of her presence. She adjusted the strap of her tote once more, feeling the reassuring weight of her legal documents pressed lightly against her side, a tangible reminder of the authority she carried even beyond the walls of the pharmacy. Officer Brad Collins remained framed in the doorway, shoulders squared, hands hanging loosely at his sides, the tension in his posture gradually easing as he watched Angela walk with measured steps, each one an unspoken assertion of her dignity. The passerby slowed slightly, sensing a story unfolding beyond their comprehension, while a young man holding a coffee paused mid-sip, the heat of the cup warming his palms as he turned his gaze to the confident figure crossing the threshold. Angela's eyes flicked briefly toward a child riding a bicycle nearby, a gentle nod acknowledging the tiny ripple of curiosity, before returning her focus to the street ahead, the sunlight casting long shadows that stretched behind her like quiet echoes of authority. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the edges of her tote bag, sending a soft flapping sound that mingled with the faint squeak of a bicycle wheel against the pavement, layering the scene with subtle textures of life continuing around the moment of personal vindication. Angela paused briefly at the corner, scanning the avenue for oncoming traffic, each breath even and deliberate. The rhythm of her heartbeat steady as she navigated the crosswalk with grace, while Officer Collins remained stationary, caught between his habitual confidence and the undeniable reality that this ordinary woman had reasserted a truth he had momentarily overlooked. Across the street, a small cafe window reflected the sunlight, illuminating dust motes dancing in the glass, and inside, patrons instinctively leaned forward, absorbing the quiet recalibration of respect and authority radiating from her figure. Angela continued down the block, the muted clatter of her shoes against the sidewalk syncing with the soft chatter and distant horn of a delivery truck, each sound punctuating the tension gradually releasing into the environment. The scent of roasted coffee beans wafted from the cafe doors, mingling with the faint aroma of freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery, grounding the moment in a tangible normalcy that contrasted with the extraordinary shift in perception she had catalyzed moments before. A cool breeze lifted the hem of her blazer, brushing against her wrist, a reminder of the city's pulse, of life moving forward around her calm command. She glanced up at the clear sky, noting the slow drift of clouds over a pale blue expanse, each movement echoing the subtle, almost imperceptible changes in the awareness of those who had witnessed her quiet assertion of authority. Officer Collins finally exhaled, a subtle loosening of the jaw, a tiny shift in weight from one foot to another, signaling the acknowledgement of the moment's significance without a word spoken. Angela's gaze remained forward, serene and unyielding, absorbing the ordinary cityscape as it absorbed the extraordinary proof of integrity and presence she had manifested, leaving a delicate yet undeniable invitation for observers to imagine the full story yet to unfold as she continued her purposeful journey down the sunlit avenue. Angela Thompson continued walking past the bustling crosswalk, her heels clicking lightly against the concrete, the rhythm steady and deliberate, blending seamlessly with the distant rumble of traffic and the soft hum of a nearby air conditioner vent. She passed a florist on the corner, the scent of fresh roses and lilies drifting into the street, mingling with the faint aroma of roasted coffee beans from a nearby cafe, creating an ordinary backdrop for an extraordinary presence. People glanced from the sidewalks, their eyes widening as they noticed her composed gait, her posture unwavering, each step exuding a quiet confidence that drew attention without demanding it. Officer Brad Collins had stepped back into the doorway of the pharmacy, his uniformed frame still visible but diminished by the subtle weight of realization, the faint crease in his brow softening as the evidence of her authority settled in the room behind him. Angela's tote shifted gently against her hip as she adjusted the strap, fingers brushing the smooth surface of her leather-bound legal pad, the pages within a silent testament to the years of knowledge and dedication she carried effortlessly, invisible yet undeniable. Across the street, a young boy on a skateboard paused mid-trick, eyes tracking her movement as if sensing the gravity of her presence, while a woman with a stroller slowed, leaning slightly too. Glimpsed the scene unfolding, capturing a moment of silent acknowledgement that resonated quietly but powerfully in the rhythm of the city. Angela's eyes flicked upward, noting the bright blue sky stretching above the buildings, clouds drifting lazily in a painterly pattern, the sunlight reflecting off the windows of surrounding storefronts and fragmented, glittering shards that danced along the pavement at her feet. The city itself seemed to bend around her composed energy, the ambient noises, the clatter of a distant delivery truck, the muted chatter of pedestrians, the occasional horn of a car, acting as a subtle symphony to her deliberate movement. She paused at the curb, hands resting lightly on the straps of her tote, exhaling slowly, allowing the pause to emphasize the quiet authority that radiated from her, unspoken yet immediately understood by the few who noticed. Officer Collins watched her cross the street from a distance, the realization that authority could be carried without raised voices or imposed force settling firmly in his mind, his stance relaxing slightly, the rigid edges of assumption softening under the undeniable presence of experience and integrity. Angela's gaze swept briefly over a street musician tuning a guitar, the faint twang of strings carrying into the air, blending with the soft rustle of paper bags and the distant hum of a bus engine, each sound layering the scene with texture and depth, grounding the moment in a tangible, almost cinematic reality. She adjusted the tote once more, the weight of her essentials pressing gently against her side, a reminder of her purpose and competence, each step measured and deliberate, marking the continuation of her journey through the city streets. The sunlight glinted off the edge of her watch, catching the attention of a passerby for a brief instant, the reflection dancing across the polished glass of a nearby storefront, a subtle reminder that even in the most ordinary moments, presence and poise can reshape perception. Angela moved forward with a serene focus, her breathing steady, the world around her alive with movement, yet seemingly in slow motion, every sound, every glance, every shadow. Amplifying the impression of quiet command she effortlessly projected, leaving an unspoken invitation for those watching to follow the path of the story as it continued to unfold beyond this single frame. Angela Thompson approached the corner of the block, her steps steady and purposeful, the sun now casting a warmer glow over the storefronts and the textured brick of the buildings lining the street. The chatter of pedestrians formed a soft background, the rustle of shopping bags, the distant clatter of bicycle wheels on the pavement, and the occasional ring of a bell from the nearby cafe, all layering the scene with subtle texture. Her gaze was calm, scanning the avenue with practiced awareness, noting each movement, each glance of those around her, yet maintaining a serene detachment that radiated authority without a single raised voice. Officer Brad Collins had retreated slightly from the doorway of the pharmacy, leaning against the frame with a subtle tension in his shoulders, the reflection of sunlight off the badge catching his eye and reminding him of the weight of the moment he had just witnessed. The city around them continued its ordinary rhythm, the muted roar of traffic, the soft patter of shoes against the sidewalk, and the hum of conversations carrying through the air, yet all these sounds seemed to frame Angela in a bubble of focused presence, a deliberate isolation that drew attention without demanding it. As she crossed the next intersection, the pedestrian signal clicking softly beneath her steps, a small group of people on the corner paused, their attention drawn to the calm confidence of her movement, the measured precision of each step across the asphalt, and the subtle sway of her tote bag that suggested competence and readiness rather than haste. The breeze lifted slightly, brushing loose strands of her hair against her cheek, the faint rustle of the leather tote accompanying the movement like a quiet rhythm, amplifying the sense of poise she carried effortlessly. Across the street, a bus idled at the stop, passengers adjusting in their seats, eyes following her path with tentative curiosity. The scene momentarily paused, as if acknowledging the silent assertion of authority that transcended the physical distance between them. Angela's focus remained forward, a serene awareness of her surroundings guiding her trajectory, her posture straight, shoulders relaxed yet firm, each movement measured and deliberate, carrying with it the calm assurance of experience and understanding of her own influence. The sunlight glinted off a nearby shop window, reflecting fragmented shards of light that danced along the pavement and across her shoes, marking the subtle passage of time and the quiet reverberation of presence that seemed to follow her. She passed a newsstand, the smell of fresh ink and paper mixing with the aroma of brewed coffee from the cafe beside it, grounding the moment in familiar sensory details while the people around her unconsciously adjusted their movements, leaving a subtle space around her as if acknowledging her unspoken authority. Officer Collins watched from the pharmacy doorway, a faint crease between his brows softening, lips pressed in a contemplative line, the realization settling gradually that the ordinary rules of perception had shifted, that respect and recognition did not always align with expectation, and that authority could manifest in presence alone. Angela adjusted the strap of her tote once more, a gentle motion that seemed to punctuate the scene, her eyes briefly flicking toward a small child holding a balloon across the street, the subtle gesture of acknowledgement balanced with her unwavering forward focus, reinforcing the quiet command she carried with effortless clarity. The ambient sounds of the city, distant engines, soft footfalls, the occasional murmur of conversation, continued, but each carried a new weight, tinted by awareness of the subtle power Angela projected, leaving the cityscape alive yet deferential as she continued her deliberate, measured journey down the sunlit avenue. Angela Thompson paused on the broad city sidewalk, her eyes lifting to the towering buildings that reflected the afternoon sun in shards of brilliance, casting a mosaic of light across the concrete and the soft shadow beneath her feet. The hum of the city continued around her, distant car horns, the faint whir of a bicycle, the chatter of pedestrians merging into a subtle symphony. Yet she moved through it with a rhythm entirely her own, each step measured, deliberate, and imbued with quiet authority. Her tote swung gently against her hip with each forward motion, the leather brushing softly against her blazer, a tactile reminder of the documents and tools of her trade tucked securely inside, symbols of the knowledge and experience that defined her presence. Across the street, a man carrying a shopping basket paused, following her progress with eyes wide in curiosity, while a young couple with a stroller slowed their pace, instinctively giving her space, a subconscious recognition of the unspoken command she carried. Officer Brad Collins had retreated further, now standing near the pharmacy doorway, his posture slightly less rigid, the creases around his eyes softening as he watched Angela walk with unwavering confidence, the subtle acknowledgement of her authority dawning in the quiet crease of his jaw and the measured exhale that seemed to release tension he had not realized he was holding. Angela's gaze swept gently over the small details of the street, the flutter of a newspaper on a bench, the subtle sway of tree branches in the breeze, the soft click of a bicycle chain on the asphalt, absorbing the environment while simultaneously projecting an aura of composed focus that drew attention without demanding it. A street musician tuning a guitar added a delicate note to the city's soundtrack, the strings vibrating softly in harmony with the distant hum of traffic and the murmur of conversation, underscoring the cinematic rhythm of the moment. Angela's movements were fluid yet grounded, each footfall echoing softly against the sidewalk, a cadence that seemed to align with the pulse of the city around her, creating a sense of inevitable momentum and purpose. She glanced briefly at a cafe across the avenue, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the faint scent of pastries from a bakery next door, sensory details grounding the scene in ordinary reality while highlighting the extraordinary presence she carried effortlessly. Shadows shifted, subtly as the sun moved across the sky, playing across her shoes and the tote at her side, each reflection and glint of light accentuating the quiet gravity of her passage. Officer Collins remained in the doorway, observing her with a new awareness, a softening of expression signaling the recognition that authority and respect were not always defined by uniform or title alone. Angela adjusted her tote once more, the gentle motion punctuating the moment with understated confidence, her eyes briefly scanning the street ahead, taking in every subtle movement, every glance, every sound, and integrating it into the awareness that guided her steps, a seamless blend of calm presence and quiet command. The city continued around her, alive with the muted symphony of life, yet every element, the hum of engines, the shuffle of feet, the faint conversation, seemed to bend gently toward her, framing her forward motion with an almost cinematic focus, leaving the scene poised, tense with anticipation, and rich with the subtle drama of authority quietly reclaimed. Angela Thompson approached the small park at the corner of the street, the late afternoon sun casting long, warm streaks across the cobblestone walkway, illuminating patches of green from the carefully trimmed grass and flower beds. The sounds of the city, distant car engines, the soft chatter of pedestrians, and the faint clatter of a delivery bicycle blended into a muted symphony that framed her deliberate pace. She lifted her eyes to observe the people scattered along the benches, a young man reading a newspaper, a mother guiding her child through the maze of paths, a dog trotting beside its owner, and yet all these ordinary figures seemed to pause briefly as her presence passed, a quiet acknowledgement of the composed authority she carried. Officer Brad Collins had taken a few steps back from the sidewalk, watching her traverse the space with a mixture of lingering incredulity and reluctant respect, the crease between his brows softening, the rigidity of his posture easing as he recognized the quiet power she wielded without raising her voice. Angela's tote swung gently with each step, leather brushing softly against her blazer, a tactile reminder of the documents she carried, symbols of knowledge and experience that made her calm and unshakable. She paused momentarily near a fountain, the water bubbling and glinting in the sunlight, casting fractured reflections onto the surrounding pavement, the rhythmic splashing blending seamlessly with the subtle background hum of the city, creating a sense of serenity amidst the underlying tension. Her gaze shifted across the scene, taking in the minor details, the flutter of a bird taking flight, the gentle sway of a tree branch in the breeze, the scattered leaves moving slowly along the ground. And each observation reinforced her awareness and composure, grounding her movement in both the physical environment and the intangible aura of authority. Pedestrians nearby instinctively adjusted their paths, giving her the unspoken space to pass, the air subtly bending around her presence as if acknowledging the gravity of the moment. The sunlight caught the edges of her hair, glinting softly against the strands and highlighting the deliberate, measured steps she took across the cobblestones, each one echoing slightly against the surface and creating a rhythm that drew the attention of even the most distracted onlookers. Officer Collins remained a silent observer, a few feet behind the threshold of the pharmacy, taking in the scene with a growing understanding that authority could exist independently of uniform, title, or assumed dominance, that respect could be commanded through presence, clarity, and quiet confidence. Angela's breathing remained even and controlled, her movements fluid and intentional, as she made her way past the park benches and the small flower beds, integrating the textures, sounds, and motions of the environment into the rhythm of her own composure. The ambient city noise, soft footsteps, a distant car horn, murmured conversations, continued as a layered backdrop, yet all of it seemed to frame her passage with a subtle gravity that amplified the significance of each deliberate motion. She adjusted the strap of her tote lightly, a minor gesture that punctuated her forward motion, a signature of poise and self-assurance, and, as she continued walking along the sunlit path, the mixture of ordinary city life and the extraordinary quiet assertion of authority created a cinematic tableau, the tension of prior moments now balanced with the unfolding calm, leaving the observer with an awareness that the story had reached a pivot, a subtle turning point filled with unspoken recognition and the promise of the next revelation. Angela Thompson finally reached the edge of the plaza, where the sunlight softened against the surface of a small fountain, casting shimmering reflections across the cobblestones and the nearby benches. Her steps slowed slightly, allowing her to take in the details of the scene, the gentle ripple of water, the delicate sway of tree branches, and the distant laughter of children playing across the street. Each element blended seamlessly with the quiet authority she projected, reinforcing the balance between the ordinary life of the city and the extraordinary presence she carried effortlessly. Officer Brad Collins had moved closer, his posture less rigid, eyes focused on her with an unmistakable shift from skepticism to respect, as though acknowledging silently the depth of composure and integrity she had demonstrated throughout the afternoon. Angela adjusted the strap of her tote once more, the leather brushing softly against her blazer, a minor motion that punctuated the calm rhythm of her journey and emphasized the understated confidence that seemed to surround her like an invisible aura. The pedestrian traffic continued, yet people instinctively offered space, pausing or stepping aside, their attention caught by the subtle interplay of movement, light, and authority, the ordinary rhythm of the city bending slightly to accommodate her passage. A street musician strummed a soft melody on a guitar near a nearby cafe, the notes mingling with the muted hum of distant engines and the occasional shuffle of footsteps, weaving an ambient soundtrack that framed the moment with an almost cinematic quality. Angela's gaze briefly swept across the plaza, acknowledging the small moments, the flutter of a bird's wings, a newspaper drifting along the walkway, the glint of sunlight on a passerby's watch, and then returned to the street ahead, her focus steady, unyielding, yet calm, a living example of measured confidence in motion. Officer Collins, still observing from a respectful distance, shifted his weight slightly, the crease in his forehead softening further, his lips pressing together in an expression that conveyed recognition of a lesson learned without the need for words. The cityscape around them continued in its usual rhythm, the clatter of a delivery truck, the murmur of conversations, and the faint ring of a distant bicycle bell blending into a tapestry of everyday life. Yet each sound seemed subtly infused with the awareness of Angela's composed authority, heightening the contrast between ordinary activity and her extraordinary poise. She took a deep, even breath, the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders reflecting the calm control that had guided her steps through the afternoon, and for a moment, the plaza seemed to pause, the ambient sounds fading just enough to create a space of quiet reflection. The sunlight shifted gently, casting long, golden shadows behind her, glinting off the polished surfaces of the surrounding storefronts, the reflections catching the attention of a few onlookers who paused in their path, absorbing the scene with a mix of curiosity and admiration. Angela's movements continued forward with a graceful precision, her totes swinging lightly against her side, her eyes scanning the environment with attentive calm, integrating the sensory details of sound, light, and motion into her internal rhythm. A subtle orchestration that allowed her to navigate the city streets with an effortless authority that left a lasting impression on everyone who had witnessed the quiet reclamation of dignity and respect, a moment suspended between the ordinary and the extraordinary, inviting contemplation of the story yet to unfold beyond this sunlit plaza. Angela Thompson finally reached the edge of the city park, where the sun dipped lower, casting long, golden streaks across the pathway, the shadows of the trees stretching lazily over the cobblestones. The gentle hum of the city persisted in the background, distant engines, soft chatter, the faint squeak of a bicycle wheel. Yet within this ordinary soundscape, her presence created a subtle shift, a quiet gravity that drew attention without demanding it. She paused for a moment on the edge of a fountain, the water glinting in the sunlight, scattering tiny reflections across the surrounding benches and paving stones, the gentle ripple accompanying the rhythm of her calm, measured breathing. Officer Brad Collins remained near the pharmacy doorway, watching from a respectful distance. The tension in his shoulders eased, the crease in his forehead softened, and a quiet acknowledgement of the lessons learned in her composed, unwavering presence reflected in his eyes. Angela's gaze swept across the plaza, taking in the ordinary details, the flutter of a bird's wings, a leaf drifting along the path, a newspaper settling at the feet of a passerby, and each observation reinforced her composed awareness, integrating the sensory information seamlessly with her quiet authority. Pedestrians nearby instinctively adjusted their paths, offering space, pausing subtly, as if acknowledging the weight of integrity she carried effortlessly. The sunlight played across the edges of her hair and the strap of her tote, catching in fleeting glimmers that highlighted the careful precision of her movements, each step deliberate, purposeful, and filled with calm resolve. The sounds of the city, the murmur of conversation, the soft clatter of a delivery truck, distant footsteps, continued, but now carried a subtle resonance, shaped by the aura of focus and quiet command she projected. Angela allowed herself a slight pause, breathing deeply, the air crisp against her skin, and in that moment the cityscape seemed to align with her presence, ordinary details blending with the extraordinary effect of calm authority. She adjusted her tote once more, a minor motion that punctuated the serenity and clarity of the moment, her eyes briefly flicking toward a child playing near the fountain, acknowledging the small interactions of life around her while remaining centered in her own purpose. The shadows lengthened as the sun moved behind the buildings, casting fractured light across the pathway, reflecting softly off the fountain water and the cobblestones, enhancing the cinematic quality of the scene. Officer Collins shifted slightly, the realization that authority and respect were not always defined by uniform or position settling fully, a subtle nod of recognition forming as he observed her composed navigation of the space. Angela continued along the edge of the plaza, each footfall light but deliberate, absorbing and integrating the textures, sounds, and movements of the city while leaving a quiet imprint of dignity, awareness, and understated power. The city continued its rhythm around her, yet every sound, every movement seemed now framed by her presence, leaving a lingering impression, a subtle tension that invited reflection, and the promise of stories yet to unfold beyond this sunlit corner, the ordinary infused with the quiet weight of extraordinary integrity.